I used to think the scariest thing about living alone was the quiet, the kind of silence that makes your own footsteps sound too loud. But that night, I realized silence isn't empty. It's just what you hear right before someone decides to move. Because when the lights in my house started turning off by themselves, I wasn't alone anymore. I was spending the weekend alone at my cabin-style house on the edge of town. It wasn't deep in the wilderness, but it felt like it was. The nearest houses were spaced far enough apart that you could go days without seeing another person. No neighbors dropping by. No door-to-door salespeople. No random visitors. Most people drove past this neighborhood without even realizing houses were hidden among the trees. From the road, it just looked like endless forest. In winter, after a heavy snowfall, the place felt even more cut off from the rest of the world. The woods behind my house looked thicker, darker, like the trees had closed in on the property. That isolation was the whole reason I'd moved there. I liked the quiet. The house itself was warm and cozy. Big windows, a stone fireplace, tall ceilings with exposed wooden beams. It felt like a place meant to be peaceful, safe. Somewhere you could forget the rest of the world existed for a while. The first night passed without anything obvious happening. I stayed up in the living room watching YouTube, drifting in and out of sleep until around midnight. Eventually, I turned off the TV and headed down the hallway to my bedroom. The bedroom was at the far end of the house. One long wall was nothing but glass, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a sliding door that opened directly toward the woods. During the day, the view was beautiful. At night, it felt like staring into a black wall. I'd gotten used to seeing my own reflection in the glass and having my heart jump, thinking someone was standing outside. But that night, something felt different. As soon as I turned off the lights and lay down, I heard a sound outside. A sharp crack. Not like an animal. Not like wind in the branches. It sounded like someone stepping on a thick, frozen branch. A few seconds later, it happened again. I sat up slowly, eyes fixed on the window. With the lights off, I could see into the darkness outside better than I wanted to. The woods stood perfectly still. Then something shifted between two of the trees. Not a clear shape, just a movement. A shadow where there shouldn't have been one. Like someone leaning forward, and then back again. I held my breath, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. Minutes passed. My heartbeat was the loudest sound in the room. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined it, that my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dark. Still, I didn't move for a long time. When I finally did, I got up and checked the sliding door, making sure it was locked. Then I climbed back into bed and stared at the ceiling. Every few seconds, I felt the urge to open my eyes and look at the window again. I barely slept. The next day, nothing happened. Not really, but the feeling didn't go away. That uneasy sense that someone was just out of sight followed me through the house. Every time I walked past a window, I felt my eyes flick toward the glass, half expecting to see a face staring back at me. I never did. But the tension stayed in my chest, tight and constant. That evening, snow started falling again. Thick, heavy flakes that blanketed the woods and softened the world outside. It should have made everything feel calmer, safer. Who would be wandering around in the cold and snow? Around 10, I was back in the living room, wrapped in a blanket by the fireplace, half watching a show. The glow from the TV lit most of the house. When I got up to grab a soda, that's when I noticed something strange. The light in the small den at the end of the hall was off. I was almost certain I'd left it on. I liked keeping that room lit at night so the house didn't feel like a cave of shadows. I walked over and flipped the switch, bathing the hallway in warm light again. Then I went back to the couch. Less than a minute later, I glanced over my shoulder. The den was dark again. I stood up slowly and walked partway down the hall. The light switch was physically flipped down. Someone had turned it off. My stomach dropped. No noise, no footsteps, no sign of anyone. Just the switch. Changed. I started backing away. My phone was charging in my bedroom. My keys were by the front door. I needed both if I was going to leave. I moved quietly toward my room, trying not to make a sound. That's when I saw movement in the glass. I froze. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of my own movement in the glass, the TV light behind me, my shadow shifting. But then I noticed the footprints, fresh footprints in the snow. They led right up to the window. My eyes followed the trail slowly, my chest tightening with every inch, until they reached a dark shape standing just a few feet outside the glass. A man. He was tall, broad shoulders, completely swallowed by shadow. The only thing I knew for certain was that he was facing me, watching me. For a split second, my mind refused to accept what I was seeing. It tried to rationalize it. A neighbor, someone lost, someone who needed help. Then the figure shifted. Not closer, not farther, just enough to let me know he was real. I ran. I turned and bolted down the hallway toward the front door, grabbing my keys from the small table by the entrance. As I did, I heard footsteps inside the house. Not one set, two. Heavy, fast footsteps echoing through the other side of the house, moving toward me. My heart slammed against my ribs as I yanked the door open and sprinted into the snow. The cold air burned my lungs. I cut toward the side driveway where my car was parked, slipping on the ice as I ran. I heard the door behind me burst open. I didn't look back until I was already throwing myself into the driver's seat. As I slammed the door shut, I saw the same dark figure from the window come rushing around the corner of the house, running straight toward my car. His movements were desperate, aggressive, like he knew he'd lost his chance. I turned the key and floored it, the tires spinning wildly on the snow before finally catching. In my rearview mirror, I saw him stop at the edge of the driveway and just stand there, watching me disappear down the road. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main highway. I sat in a gas station parking lot for almost half an hour, shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. When I finally called the police, my voice came out broken and uneven as I tried to explain what I'd seen. They didn't arrive at the house until over 30 minutes later. What they found made my stomach turn. Multiple windows had been shattered. The front door and back door showed signs of forced entry. Inside, the house looked like it had been torn apart. Furniture flipped, cabinet doors ripped from their hinges, deep gouges in the walls, like someone had slammed heavy objects into them over and over. It looked less like a burglary, and more like an explosion of rage. I told the officers I'd heard 2 people inside and seen 1 man outside the window. But the destruction inside the house made it impossible to tell how many there actually were, or how long they'd been inside while I was there, completely unaware. That thought still makes my skin crawl. The idea that I'd spent the entire day in that house, walking room to room, sitting on the couch, cooking dinner, while people were already there. Moving quietly, watching, waiting. I stayed in a hotel for weeks after that, had the house repaired. Then I put it up for sale. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been hunted, that they'd been watching me long before I noticed anything was wrong, learning my routine, learning when I was alone, learning how to move through my house without being heard. Even now, years later, I still have the same nightmare. I'm standing in that hallway. The light in the den is off, and I know that something is waiting for me just beyond the doorway. Next story. For most of my adult life, I thought the worst part of living alone was the silence. Empty rooms, long hallways, that strange feeling of being the only heartbeat in a big house. I was wrong. The worst part wasn't being alone. It was realizing I never actually was. And the only one who knew before I did was my dog. My name is Ethan. I'm 36 years old, and before this happened, I lived alone in a house that was far too big for one person. 2 years earlier, my wife and I had separated only a few months after buying the place together. It wasn't a dramatic breakup, no screaming matches, no police involved, but it still left me standing in a massive, half-empty house that suddenly felt like a monument to a life that never happened. The house was meant for a future, kids, pets, a family. Instead, it became a hollow shell. I told myself I'd make use of the space, turn one room into a home office, another into a gym, maybe a guest room. But the truth is, I never really did. Most of the rooms stayed untouched, collecting dust. Some of them I wouldn't even step into for months at a time. There were nights when the emptiness felt heavier than the walls themselves. The silence in that house didn't feel peaceful. It felt like something waiting. That loneliness is what finally pushed me to adopt a dog. Her name was Luna. She was an 8-month-old beagle mix from a shelter about 3 hours away. Energetic, curious, the kind of dog that wagged her entire body when she was happy. The drive home was filled with her shifting around the back seat, whining softly, pressing her nose against the window. But the moment I brought her into the house, everything changed. The excitement drained from her. She froze in the entryway, ears low, body stiff. Slowly, she walked inside, nose low to the floor, tail tucked. She didn't explore the house the way I expected. She didn't wander. She didn't sniff every corner. Instead, after barely a minute of walking around, she jumped up onto the couch and pressed herself against me, trembling slightly. I laughed it off at the time. New environment, new smells. Big house. It made sense she'd be nervous. That night, I brought her upstairs and we went to bed. The next morning felt normal enough. Luna followed me around while I made coffee, then curled up under my desk while I worked from home. For a while, it felt like things were finally settling into place. Until she suddenly got up. She walked out of the office and down the hallway, stopping at the top of the stairs. I didn't think much of it. Dogs explore. Dogs get curious. I went back to my work. 10 minutes later, she started barking. Not playful barking, not excited barking, terrified barking. It echoed through the house, bouncing off walls and empty rooms. I ran downstairs, calling her name, my voice swallowed by the size of the place. When I found her, she was standing in the middle of one of the empty rooms on the first floor. She was barking at the wall. Not the window, not the door, the wall. When she saw me, she rushed over, pressing against my leg, shaking. I stepped into the room, confused. There was nothing there, just bare walls, dusty floors, empty space. I closed the door to the room and carried her back upstairs, trying to calm both of us down. That night, I woke up to her standing at the bedroom door, staring at the crack in the doorway. I should have questioned it. I should have gotten up, but I didn't. The next morning, everything seemed normal. Luna was back to her usual self, tail wagging, ears up, following me around while I made breakfast. I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing the night before. New dog, new house. My brain filling in shadows that weren't really there. But as the day went on, that uneasy feeling crept back in. Around noon, Luna suddenly stopped chewing on one of her toys and lifted her head. Her ears went straight up. She stared down the hallway that led toward the staircase. She didn't bark this time. She just listened. Then she slowly stood up and walked out of the room. I watched her go, slightly unsettled, but didn't follow right away. I told myself she was probably just exploring again. A few minutes passed. Then she started barking. The sound came from downstairs again. Sharp, panicked, like the day before. I rushed out of my office and down the stairs, calling her name. Her barking echoed through the house, making it impossible to tell exactly where she was. When I finally found her, she was standing in that same empty room, the one she'd barked at before. Her body was stiff. Her tail was tucked so tight it looked painful. She wasn't barking at the wall this time. She was barking at the doorway. At me. At least. That's what it felt like at first. But when I stepped into the room, her gaze slid past me, over my shoulder, fixed on something behind me in the hallway. A chill ran through my spine. I turned around slowly. The hallway was empty. I picked her up, shut the door to the room again, and carried her back upstairs. I tried to laugh it off. Tried to tell myself dogs react to sounds humans can't hear. Pipes, old houses, drafts. Anything but the truth my gut was trying to whisper. That night I went to bed early. I woke up sometime after midnight with a feeling of being watched. Luna was standing again, right at the bedroom door. Her body was tense. Her ears were flat against her head. She was staring at the crack between the door and the frame like she expected something to come through it. I whispered her name. She didn't move. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, staring at the doorway. The hallway beyond it was pitch black. The house was completely silent. No creaks, no footsteps, no wind, just stillness. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally laid back down. The next day was worse. By late afternoon, Luna was gone. Not outside, not in the kitchen, not curled up under my desk like usual. The house was silent in that heavy way again. I walked through the halls, calling her name. My voice echoed off walls that suddenly felt too far apart. When I reached the downstairs hallway, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The door to that empty room was cracked open. I was certain I had closed it. I pushed it open slowly. Luna was sitting in the far corner, pressed against the wall. She was trembling. Her eyes were wide, locked on the doorway where I stood. She let out a low, broken whimper when she saw me. Before I could step toward her, something in me screamed to turn around. I did. And at the far end of the hallway, near the stairs, I saw a shape pull back into the darkness. A person. Just a glimpse. A shoulder. The edge of a face. Enough to know I wasn't imagining things anymore. I slammed the door shut and locked it, backing toward Luna. Footsteps moved softly down the hallway outside. Slow, deliberate, confident. Whoever it was, they weren't in a rush. They stood on the other side of the door for a long moment. Not knocking, not speaking, just waiting. I didn't sleep in that house again. Not that night, not even the next one. The police stayed until almost morning. They dusted for prints, checked every room, every window, every door. But whoever had been living inside my house had vanished like they were never there to begin with. Except they were there. In the upstairs bedroom next to my office, the one I hadn't stepped into in months, the officers found what looked like a makeshift living space. Old food wrappers, empty water bottles, a blanket shoved into the back of the closet. The floor was worn down in one spot, like someone had been standing in the same place over and over again. They told me it looked like someone had been hiding in my house for a long time, possibly months. The thought of that still makes my stomach turn. Every day I'd been working at my desk, answering emails, going about my life. And just a few feet away, someone was listening to me breathe, waiting for me to fall asleep, waiting for the house to go quiet. That night, Piper didn't bark at nothing. She wasn't just adjusting. She knew someone was there before I did. I sold the house a few weeks later. Didn't even argue about the price. I just wanted out. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up thinking I hear footsteps in the hallway. I still check the corners of rooms I haven't been in for a while. I still lock my bedroom door, even though I know no one else is supposed to be there. Because the worst part isn't that someone broke into my house. The worst part is knowing they lived there with me, and I never even knew. Next story. I used to think the scariest part of being home alone was boredom. Long hours, empty rooms, nothing happening. But that night, I learned how wrong I was. Because someone wasn't just outside my house. They were close enough to see me through the windows, and worse, they were already inside. I was 18 at the time, still living with my parents. They were gone for a couple of days, and since I was old enough, they trusted me to stay home alone. Our house wasn't special, just a normal suburban place. Quiet street. Neighbors you barely talk to. The kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happens. That morning, I did what I always did when my parents were away. Stayed in bed too long. Watched TV. Didn't bother getting dressed right away. When I finally went downstairs to make breakfast, my phone buzzed. It was my friend texting me. "Who's the guy outside your house?" I froze. I texted back, "What?" Then I walked over to the front window. There was no one there. No cars, no people. Just an empty street and quiet houses. My friend lived directly across from me. I couldn't see him in his window either, which made it even weirder. So I called him, assuming he was messing with me. But he wasn't joking. He told me he'd seen some guy standing near my house. Someone he didn't recognize. And what bothered him was that the guy seemed to be looking into my windows. By the time we were talking about it, the guy was gone. We didn't know what to make of it, so we brushed it off and hopped on Discord to play games like we usually did. For a few hours, everything felt normal. I only went downstairs once to grab water and check the window again. Still nothing. By the time we got off the call, it was already dark. I went downstairs to make a quick dinner. That's when I saw a shadow flicker across the wall in front of me. It was quick, just a movement. I turned around. Nothing. The living room was empty. The window was dark. I stared outside for a few seconds, feeling that familiar chill crawl up my spine. I told myself it was probably just a car passing by. I finished dinner and went back upstairs to my room, laid in bed, turned the TV on, let the noise fill the silence. An hour passed. The only light in my room was the TV glow. At some point, I realized how dark the hallway outside my door was. I kept glancing at the crack beneath the door. It shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. So I paused the show and told myself I was just being paranoid. I decided to go downstairs, grab a snack, and turn all the lights on. As soon as I opened my bedroom door, the feeling got worse. The hallway felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. I turned the hallway light on, saw nothing there, and felt stupid for being scared. I went downstairs, checked the windows again, and left all the lights on before heading back up. Halfway up the stairs, I stopped. I heard footsteps. but they didn't sound like mine. It sounded like someone was stepping when I stepped, mimicking me. I took a step down, then back up. The sound didn't repeat. My heart started pounding. That's when it hit me. Someone was walking behind me, matching my steps so I wouldn't hear them. I ran up the stairs, slammed my bedroom door shut, locked it, and called the police. While I waited, I called my friend again. He went to his window and started scanning outside. Then he suddenly said, "Oh shit." He told me he saw a man running from the side of my house, disappearing into the trees. He said it looked like the same guy from earlier. When the police arrived, they searched the house and the yard. They didn't find anyone. But they told us about a similar incident nearby. Another kid home alone. Another man creeping around outside, trying to get inside. They never caught him. And to this day, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't heard those footsteps. All I know is, he was already inside my house, and I was seconds away from finding that out the worst way possible. Next story. I used to think that the worst thing about staying alone in a house that wasn't yours was the silence. The kind of silence that settles in after midnight. No traffic, no voices, no movement. Just the quiet reminder that if something went wrong, no one would hear you. I learned that night that silence isn't the scariest part. The scariest part is realizing someone else is awake in the house with you. A few months ago, I agreed to house sit for a couple I barely knew. They were friends of friends, heading out of town for the weekend and needed someone to watch their place and feed their dog. The house sat near the edge of a small town, not remote, but far enough from neighbors that you couldn't see another porch light from the windows. It was one of those neighborhoods where the houses were spaced out and surrounded by trees. During the day, it felt peaceful. At night, it felt empty. The first evening went by normally. I ordered food, fed the dog, and spent most of the night watching YouTube on the couch. The house itself was older, and it made the usual sounds. Pipes ticking, wood creaking, the faint groan of the structure shifting as the temperature dropped outside. Around midnight, I headed upstairs to the guest bedroom. The hallway light stayed on. I don't like complete darkness in places I'm not familiar with. I left the bedroom door slightly open so the soft light from the hall spilled across the floor. It made the room feel less closed in. I fell asleep pretty quickly. At some point in the night, I woke up with that strange, instinctive feeling that something wasn't right. No noise, no movement. Just that heavy awareness you get when your body senses danger before your mind catches up. I opened my eyes and immediately noticed something was different. The hallway light was off. The bedroom door was wide open. The hallway beyond it was pitch black. For a second, I thought maybe the homeowners had smart lights on a timer or motion sensor. Maybe the light shut itself off. It was a logical explanation, but it didn't explain why my door was open. I was sure I'd left it cracked, not fully open. I lay still, listening. The house was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Even the usual creaks and settling sounds were gone. The silence felt deliberate. Then I heard breathing. Not loud, not rushed. Slow, steady breathing. It wasn't coming from inside the room. It was coming from the hallway. Someone was standing just outside the door. My entire body went cold. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I stared into the darkness beyond the doorway, trying to see a shape, a shadow, anything that confirmed what I was hearing. The breathing continued, calm and controlled, like the person standing there wasn't worried about being caught. Like they were listening to me breathe too. I wanted to grab my phone, but it was on the nightstand. Even the smallest movement felt like it would give me away. The glow of the screen would have been visible instantly. Seconds stretched into minutes. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was convinced whoever was out there could hear it. The fear wasn't loud panic. It was a slow, suffocating terror that made every thought feel heavy. Then the breathing stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I waited, barely daring to breathe, until I heard soft footsteps moving away from the doorway. Slow, careful, the sound of someone trying not to be heard as they walked down the hallway. I stayed frozen in bed for what felt like forever. When I finally worked up the nerve to move, I grabbed my phone and locked myself in the bathroom. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. I called the homeowner first. They sounded confused and scared, told me they'd never had anything like that happen before, but mentioned there had been break-ins in the area over the past few months. I called the police next. They arrived about 15 minutes later and searched the house from top to bottom. Every door was locked. Every window was secure. There were no signs of forced entry. No footprints. No damage. Nothing to suggest someone had been inside. The officers told me it was possible I'd heard the house settling or some kind of animal outside. I didn't argue. I just nodded and waited for them to leave. I packed my things immediately. Before I left the house, I went back into the guest bedroom to grab my charger from the nightstand. The bedroom door was closed. I knew, without a doubt, that I hadn't closed it. And that was the moment I realized the scariest part of that night wasn't the breathing in the hallway. It was the fact that whoever had been standing outside my door had time to move around the house freely, and I had been asleep.